Your car's fuse box is a hub of protection for all the circuits in your car. Although it's called a fuse box, fuses are not the only thing residing within it. This video is going to explain what those components are, what they do, and how to find the right one that you're looking for. First off, with a few exceptions, power is brought in from the positive side of the battery to the fuse box via a wire. It is usually a thick gauge wire because everything that's protected by a circuit in that fuse box is going to have power supplied by that wire. In this example and many other cars, the end of the wire is bolted to the fuse box. From there, the circuit splits off and heads to the fuses and other components. So what does a fuse do? Well, every circuit in your car is sending power to a component, and that component has resistance. As long as voltage remains the same, if resistance goes up, current goes down. In circuits where current is high, a thicker gauge wire will be used because the higher the current, the more heat is generated. Although copper wires are a great conductor of electricity, there is some resistance there. A thinner wire is going to have more resistance. So if you have a component with high resistance, you don't need a thick wire to bring power to it. But if that circuit were to short out, you would have a lot of current in that wire all of a sudden, and that would generate a lot of heat, melting the insulation on the wire and possibly the wire itself. It could also damage other components, like fusing a relay into its current position. Those are all issues that you would encounter if there was no protection on the circuit. That's where the fuse comes in. In order to protect the circuit, the fuse acts as the weakest point in the circuit, so when the current is too strong, the fused element inside heats up and breaks. That braking action disconnects the circuit, which means electricity can't flow through it anymore. That circuit has essentially been switched off. Different fuses will be able to handle different amounts of current, and that's usually noted on the fuse somewhere with a number telling how many amps it can handle. This is also why it's important to replace the fuse with the same amperage rating. If the amperage rating is too low, it will break too soon. If the amperage rating on that fuse is too high, components may fail before the fuse does. But what does a relay do? Relays are these little boxes that are larger than most fuses and are a little more complicated. Summed up in a single sentence, a relay allows a small current to control a big current. They also allow the vehicle's computers to control high amperage items such as the ECU controlling the radiator fan. When you flip a switch that controls a relay, electricity is allowed to flow through that switch to the relay and energize a coil within that relay. Sending current through that coil creates a magnetic field. That magnetic field interacts with a switching component which completes a circuit elsewhere. In some relays, that also pulls the switching contact off of another circuit. That circuit would be considered a normally closed circuit because without interacting with the relay at all, it's already allowing electricity to flow through it. The other circuit is considered normally open because without sending power to the relay coil, that circuit is disconnected. The mechanical action of that switch contact slamming into place is what gives relays their click sound. However, there are solid-state relays which have no moving parts and use transistors to do the work. Because there are no moving parts, solid-state relays don't make any noise unless they're specifically designed to make an artificial sound. So what does a diode do? A diode only allows DC current to flow in one direction. Diodes are useful in preventing flyback voltage from damaging computers. Flyback voltage is a spike in voltage that comes from a collapsing magnetic field in a coil or winding such as one found in a motor or a solenoid, and you'll even find them in relays, which is why some of them will have a built-in diode or resistor to deal with that. In all of these cases, the diode is there to create a controlled path for that spike in voltage to dissipate. In a fuse box, a diode will typically have the electronic symbol for diode either printed or molded into the plastic of the diode itself. So how do you find the right fuse, relay, or diode? If you are looking to find one of these components, there are two common approaches. The first is to find the owner's manual. Check the index or glossary for fuses or fuse box. Go to that page and find the guide. This guide should tell you the location of the fuse boxes themselves, as well as the components inside those boxes. The fuses and other components are usually listed by location and/or number. And do note that these don't correspond with the numbers printed on top of the fuses. The second method is to just go look for the fuse boxes. Sometimes the fuse box itself will have listings under the lid explaining what those components do. The tricky part about this method is that you have to figure out where the fuse box is on your own, and you don't know how many fuse boxes are in the car. Typically on modern cars, there's an engine bay fuse box and an interior fuse box. The engine bay fuse box will typically be under the hood functions, while your interior fuse box will typically have protection for things like the blower motor and window motors. However, there could be more fuse boxes or even just one. So how do you remove a fuse or relay? First, make sure the power is off, ideally by disconnecting the battery, but definitely with the engine off. When dealing with fuses, sometimes you can remove them by hand, but it's easier if you have a set of fuse pullers. Sometimes the fuse box might even have a set of fuse pullers right in there. Fuse boxes have become pretty compact over the years, so sometimes there's not a lot of room to get your fingers between each fuse. Relays can be packed in there pretty tightly too, so a pair of relay pulling pliers can help a lot in certain fuse boxes. Here's how to check a fuse. After removing the fuse, you'll probably want to check to make sure that it's actually in need of replacement. While there are a bunch of different fuse designs, the end goal is the same. Does one contact connect to the other contact within the fuse? Usually it's pretty straightforward, but sometimes they can fail in a weird spot that's hard to see. To be sure, you can test for continuity with a multimeter. You can also test a fuse on the car with a multimeter if there are test points on the fuse. So why are there some empty spots for fuses and relays in there? Some of those extra fuse locations may be for features that this particular car doesn't have. Even if this car has every feature that they had available, those extra spots are potential features that can be added down the road. Take a closer look inside where that fuse would go. While it is possible that a manufacturer may put contacts in there for no reason, you will probably notice that there's either one or no contacts at all in these empty spots. While these empty spots can be used for spare fuse locations, you run the risk of pulling the wrong fuse by mistake. It's easier for everyone if the spare fuses are located somewhere else, such as in this example. And now for the bonus fact round. This is going to contain stuff that may be found in your fuse box, but it's a little more obscure. Breakers. Similar to the breakers in your house, they're kind of like a reusable fuse. Some of them will need to be manually reset like a typical house breaker, but some of them will reset on their own. Fusible links. These are a narrow section of wire designed to be a failure point. They're typically 4 wire gauges smaller than the rest of the wire that's in the circuit. These are typically used in scenarios where you need to allow for a spike in amperage that the engineers have deemed necessary. Fusible links are typically not found in a fuse box, so they can be pretty tricky to find. Inline fuse holders. An inline fuse holder lets you put a fuse pretty much anywhere you can put a wire. However, you may need to get one that's waterproof depending on where you plan to put it. You will also need to remember where it is, which is a good use for the notes section of your owner's manual. Fuse taps. These allow you to easily add a circuit to the fuse box. However, these have the potential to cause problems between the battery and the tap because although you're making 2 different circuits with fused sections on them to protect those circuits, the wire leading up to that tap was only designed to handle that original fuse. For example, if you tap into a 20 amp fuse and add another 20 amp fuse to that circuit, both of those circuits individually are going to be protected for 20 amps, but anything leading up to that tap in this example is only going to be protected from 40 amps. Even if up to that point there was wiring that was designed to be overkill and can handle 25 amps, and both of these circuits are safely running at 15 amps each, that's 30 amps before you get to the tap, and as far as the fuses are concerned, they're only dealing with 15 amps each, so they're perfectly fine with that. Fuse blocks. Technically, a fuse box is a fuse block as well. However, if you're looking to buy a fuse block, you're probably referring to one of these aftermarket items, which allow you to build a bunch of fused circuits. There is a main post that you will connect a thick gauge wire to. That wire is going to have to be able to handle the amperage of all those circuits combined. Internally, the circuitry will split off from that post and head to the fuses. Once a fuse is connected, it continues the circuit off to a connector, and from there you build the rest of your circuit. Hopefully all of this demystified the automotive fuse box for you. If you have any questions about anything you saw in this video, let me know in the comments section, but also I have a bunch of videos explaining automotive electronics, fuses, relays. Check those out too. Those videos dive more into the specifics of each of those components, and things like voltage, amperage, parallel circuits, that's all electronic stuff, and if I went into explaining that in this video, it would be 30 or 40 minutes long. I feel like that length would have discouraged a lot of people from clicking this video in the first place, so definitely check those out if you're not familiar, and I hope to see you in the next Car Simplified video. Thanks for watching.